Joining me now for our Midseason Awards show. Midseason-ish. We got a little bit past the halfway point, but we're still going to do it now because we were a little bit busy last weekend with the trade deadline. First off, it's my co-host here at the Athletic Football Show. It's Derrik Clausen. Derrik, how you doing, man?
I'm doing good. Us having to push off the midseason awards, that's not our fault. It's the NFL's fault for putting the trade deadline where it is now, them pushing it back. So I don't feel bad about this at all.
Yeah, the trade deadline should be on November 19th. It should be after week 11, and then we wouldn't have to worry about any of this. They should consider my programming when they figure out what the league calendar looks like. Also joining us today for our midseason awards chatter, it's my buddy from ESPN, Bill Barnwell. Barnwell, how you doing over there?
Maze, I'm excited. Throwing some stuff into the ring here. Very thrilled to just share my opinions on the awards. I may have written about this for ESPN last week. That may have helped the preparation for the show significantly, and I appreciate that. But really excited. Some I feel like very obvious, and some not so obvious. So I'm really intrigued to hear what you guys think about some of these closer calls.
I have like 17 honorable mentions for a couple of these. For a couple of these awards, I'm going to list off the whole league just to cover all my bases because I do think the race for them is that tight. Before we get to the awards, a couple things we wanted to hit at the top of the show here. Let's start with talking about Monday Night Football from last night. Barnwell, I'm going to tee you up on this first because Derrik and I think both were kind of in lockstep about how we felt about the Rams coming into this week. After getting Puka Nacua back, getting their offensive lineman back, the way they played against the Vikings a couple weeks ago, it's like, all right, it feels like the Rams are coming, right? It feels like the Rams have a chance to be relevant in the NFC playoff race when they get back to full strength. Are we going to see the type of offense we saw in 2023? Slight misstep against the Seahawks, but I was still a believer heading into this game against the Dolphins. They lose last night. They're now 4-5. They're a game and a half back of Arizona in the win column. How much belief did you have in this iteration of the Rams coming into this week?
I was optimistic, maybe not as optimistic as you guys, it sounds like, but certainly felt like they could beat the Dolphins here because I was not optimistic about the Dolphins. I was more concerned about the Dolphins than I was about the Rams necessarily. And I don't think I'm willing to write that off yet, but I think you've seen that the margin for error for this team is not as high as maybe we hoped. And there were so many moments in that game last night where the Rams would be driving and then something would go wrong. We'd have a snap go over Matthew Stafford's head. From Jonah Jackson. They would have Kyron Williams get blown up for a loss of 10 yards on a TFL. They would have missteps with penalties. Stafford threw an interception. They had these sloppy plays, and once that happened, it felt like those drives were over. And some of them were on third downs, like, of course, the drive's going to be over after that. But, even when they were in the middle of the drive, it felt like they had these unsurvivable errors. And I think in my head, given the talent they have, given the playmakers they have to work with, given what Matthew Stafford can do out of structure, it kind of felt like, okay, even if you get in a 2nd and 19, it's not hopeless. You can still maybe get, 3 points out of this. You can maybe get 7 points out of this. You can continue to drive. The Dolphins had a 3rd and 19 in this game where they checked down to Raheem Mostert and got a first down and continued to drive after what looked like probably an unsurvivable situation. And that's the part that I think concerns me about the Rams is just, this was a roster. This was a acquisition of Matthew Stafford that was supposed to thrive out of structure, that was supposed to make stuff happen. And of course, he can still do that. But it felt in last night's game that they were too sloppy, too inconsistent. The offensive line didn't play well enough. And because of that, they ended up settling for field goals, ended up settling for punts, turned the ball over. And they didn't have enough of a margin for error to overcome that. And then, of course, the Sean McVay clock management at the end, which is a whole other story.
We'll talk about that in a second. Derrik, when you were looking at that Rams team last night, where is the gap to you between the team you expected to see and the team that was on the field? Are you solely chalking this up or mostly chalking this up to self-inflicted wounds, which, like Barnwell alluded to, there were several of them? Or do you think there's something else going on here that maybe is preventing this offense and this team from kind of fulfilling what we think they're capable of and what we've seen them do in the past?
I think it's two things. I think one of it is certainly self-inflicted wounds. And look, this has been, even at his best as a Ram, this has been a feature of the Matthew Stafford Rams. Like, they just have 3-4 games a year where it's just like, whoa, buddy, like he's just missing throws that he's not supposed to miss. He's taking sacks he shouldn't take. And he's great, 75% of the time, and it doesn't matter, right? But I think we've seen him have these games where some things just kind of blow up for him. I think those games kind of come a little bit more often when the run game is not helping him at all. Like, the run game wasn't completely putrid in this last game, but it wasn't really helpful either. It wasn't as good as they have been for a majority of the season. So I think that's a factor. I also think with just as much as they continue to shuffle the offensive line and continue to try to work new pieces in, just trying to get consistency there is always going to be a problem. And I think they've just kind of struggled to be what they want to be up front. And I think when you have a Dolphins front that is truthfully really good, like they have dudes like Zach Steeler's really good. Chop Robinson
He was
is
back
coming
last
along.
night.
Oh, dude.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and
Calais.
so yes, Calais Campbell somehow looks ageless. Like, so this is a defensive front that will punish you if you're a little bit uneven on the offensive line. And I think the Rams just were in this game. So I think I'm not that worried about the Rams in the sense of like, I still think they can be a good and competitive team. It's just kind of unlucky that they're in a very contested NFC as opposed to an AFC that is wide open, and 4 and 5 wouldn't even matter.
Yeah,
4 and 5 still isn't great though.
Well, right.
4 and 5's
like,
not great, no question.
At least in the AFC, you'd be more comfortably alive, whereas like in the NFC, it's
Sure.
like you are closer to dead than not.
Yeah, one of the biggest choices that we haven't really talked, maybe you guys have talked about it, I haven't talked about it very much, and they haven't been on the field very much, and so we haven't actually seen it play out, but we saw it last night, and I think it's really interesting, is the decision that the Rams made this offseason, right? To move Steve Avila to center, play Jonah Jackson at guard, and that has been entirely abandoned. It was abandoned before they got hurt earlier in the year. This, to me, one of the biggest choices you can make, because Jonah Jackson, to my knowledge, Maze, I don't think he's played center at any level before.
No, because Frank Ragnow was
playing.
there, but I think he wanted to play center or thought that center might be his best position, that Ragnow was preventing him from doing that in Detroit. And I actually think that's part of the reason that they were comfortable doing it, is because they have seen Avila at guard. You know, it's like, all right, we won't change 2 spots on the offensive line. We'll change 1 spot on the offensive line, which I get. The problem is, and you saw this a little bit last night, and I think a lot of people responded to the news of those guys playing and said, ooh, more talent, good. Like the offensive line is what we thought it was going to be coming into the year, minus Rob Havenstein. But then you saw last night that I think the Dolphins did a very good job of this. They took advantage of the fact that that group has had no time together. And they had not even the fact that they've been hurt for most of the season. Jonah Jackson got hurt almost immediately after they moved him to center. So the amount of practice time we've seen for this group overall is almost non-existent. And I think you saw that last night. So you combine that with Joe Noteboom losing immediately to Chop Robinson on one of those sacks. I think Anthony Weaver did an excellent job of testing the pass protection rules last night. Thought he called a great game for the Dolphins. And then the last component of this is that I think that Matthew Stafford is still capable of throwing this shit out of the ball, right? We saw that 3-4 big moments last night. Talking to Sean McVay this summer, he said something funny, and I remember it because he did like a little hand gesture while he was talking about it. He was talking about Stafford moving around in the pocket, and he was saying that even at this age, Matthew plays a lot of tennis, and you can feel that in his pocket movement. Like he has a lot of good side-to-side movement. There's an ability to maneuver that in that space. I think that is the area of his game that looks the worst right now when you compare it to what it looked like in 2023. He was one of the most efficient quarterbacks in the league when pressured last season, like top 8, up there with the Josh Allens, the Lamars, everything else. Here are the quarterbacks with a worse EPA per dropback this season when pressured than Matthew Stafford. Will Levis, Spencer Rattler, Gardner Minshew. End of list. That's it. And so I do think that even though last night there are reasons that the pass protection was tested, that's not going to happen every single week. This has become a consistent enough thing, Derrik, that I don't think some of what we saw last night is necessarily an outlier.
Here's my thing with this. I definitely don't think he's playing well under pressure. And again, I think some of this just goes back to some of the offensive line woes and injuries and inserting guys into the lineup. I think that has a part to do with it. But I also think sometimes this is just the price of doing business when you play against pressure like a psychopath. Like sometimes you have the 2021 year where you can do whatever you want under pressure and you go win a Super Bowl. And then sometimes you have these years where it's just you're trying to make all these tight window throws from collapsing pockets, and sometimes it doesn't work out. I mean, go look at Jordan Love in Green Bay. Like, I don't think he's a bad quarterback under pressure, but against pressure this year, because he plays like an insane person, his numbers don't look very good at all. And I think sometimes that's just like, again, the price of doing business when you are willing to always make the hardest throw. Sometimes you just don't make a lot of them.
Yeah, it invites volatility, and we know that stat isn't necessarily consistent year to year, and this is an unfortunate downswing in that. Barnwell, the 4th and 4 decision for McVay is just one of those moments where with some coaches, I'd want to like reach through the TV screen and just grab them by the shirt lapels and shake them a little bit. With Sean, I just want to put my arm around and be like, buddy, Why? Like, why do we continue to do this? Like, it's everything else that you do consistently is putting your team in great positions over and over and over again. And then this late game stuff and some of the situational decision making continues to be maddening. And last night is a perfect example. Like, just play this out for 3 steps ahead. You probably are going to need these points eventually. Are you going to be in a better position than you are right now on 4th and 4 late in the game? And I think the answer is definitively no. I just don't know how this continues to happen when it's been such a consistent problem.
I was almost mad that it played out so perfectly for that argument, because I know people were going to be like, oh, well, you're just, you didn't know what was going to happen. Like, I wanted the outcome weirdly to be worse for my argument than it actually was, because it turned out exactly the way you would have expected it. The Dolphins move downfield, kick a field goal, render that first field goal totally irrelevant, and then the Rams have to hit like that 5-leg parlay at the end where they have to kick a field goal, get an onside kick, drive down the field and score, hit a 2-pointer, win in overtime, which is just an insane thing to pull off. And I think the tough part for me now is, like, we've come a long way. It's been 15 years since I was writing about coaching decisions for Grantland, and a lot of, like, I couldn't do that column now because a lot of the stuff that was really low-hanging fruit has been mostly taken out of the game.
Antonio Pierce every week. It's the only guy who'd be in there.
No, well, you would say that, but a couple weeks ago, the Rams played the Raiders. It was a 4th and 1, a minute 40 left. They're up 5 points. I think the Raiders were out of timeout, so a 1-yard wins them the game. And Sean McVay punted against the Raiders. And I understand the Raiders offense is not great. I think they're probably overcorrecting for different measures of team ability. But just a decision that I think the vast majority of teams in the NFL would say, okay, we need a yard. We can get a yard to win the game. The Rams decided to punt. This week, we have the 4th and 4 stuff with them. They even kick a field goal. I don't think there was really a good decision with 30 seconds left, but they kick a field goal to go down 8 again in the final minute of this game. And the part that I find so frustrating is, I know the Rams have analytics people. I know the Rams have smart people in that front office. I know they have people who know these are bad decisions. But if your coach doesn't listen to them, it doesn't matter. And for all of the incredible things Sean McVay does, it feels like it's a son of coach or people who grew up in the coaching industry thing, because Kyle Shanahan doesn't do this.
Oh, it's a good thought. I hadn't thought about
that.
Like
Matt LaFleur is strangely, because I feel like if you grew up in a different space, you have to think about it differently. Although I will say, maybe that's a little overstated, because Matt LaFleur is pretty aggressive in Green Bay. Brian Callahan has been pretty thoughtful in Tennessee. Like, I don't know if it's just that you grew up with coaches who were telling you punt in these situations, and so that was a way to you felt like you were smart by actually pursuing a conservative path as opposed to being more aggressive. But it does feel like Sean McVay is never going to change with this stuff. And it just sucks because he's so good in so many other ways that this is like you can't teach so many of the things Sean McVay does well, but this is the one thing you can teach. This is the one thing you can actually improve on. And he has chosen either to ignore it or doesn't trust his team in those situations.
The fact that he's still like the 2nd youngest coach in the league, hopefully there's actual room and time for some of this to change the way there isn't with some of the other coaches.
You know what, Mays? It's going to be easy. He's going to leave the Rams. He's going to go into media. Then he's going to spend a year at PFF, just like Mike McCarthy did. And then he's going to be informed to make smart decisions.
We've spent 12 of the minutes here talking about a team that lost this game. And part of the reason is because the Dolphins season is pretty much over, right? They have so much ground that they have to make up. I think it's going to be difficult to get there. I think it's probably a far cry for them to actually make the playoffs. What felt different last night, Derrik, though, that I do want to point out before we move on. One, we mentioned Anthony Weaver, how great of a job he did calling that game last night. The other thing that I think was integral to the Dolphins winning that game, and does feel a little bit different about their offense. Out of structure, Tua creating Tua making plays. Like, if this is going to be the version of Tua that we're going to get, I think I sort of have to recalibrate about what my expectations are for the Dolphins offense moving forward.
This is the player they sold us that we were getting this offseason, right? Where it's
Skinny
like,
Tua.
Skinny Tua. He's lost a little bit of weight. He's going to go back to what he was at Alabama, which, like, truthfully, at Alabama, this actually was one of his best traits, is he would have like 3 plays a game where he could get outside the pocket and it wouldn't be like Josh Allen, where he's throwing it 45 yards down the field, but he'd go make a play that you were like, oh, okay, that kind of saved the drive. And he had a number of those last night, whereas really for the past, like, other than his rookie year, he's basically never been that guy. And so for him to have that a little bit in his bag last night was good. I'm still not sure how much I believe it. Like, I think I'm going to need more than one game against the Rams defense that still leaves a lot of air in the coverage, for me to believe it. But I think if he continues to do that, like, that is probably their path to somehow digging themselves out of the 3-6 hole that they're in.
All right, so how real is digging out of that 3-6 hole? Are you just
It's
being
not.
contrarian Barnwell over there? Or are you thinking this is actually something that can happen?
Have you seen who they play the next few weeks? They
I
have
have not
home
looked
games.
at it. Truly
They have
haven't
home
looked at
games
it.
the next 2 weeks against the Raiders and the Patriots. They are at Green Bay.
Have you seen
That
the
is not going to
Patriots
be pretty.
defense?
The
Drake
Patriots
May's winning
defense
that
has
game.
been good for 1 week. They had 9 sacks in that game against the Bears. They had 8 sacks in their prior 6 games combined. Come on. Like I was super high in the Patriots defense. They have been very disappointing this season.
I want to be very
Raiders
clear
and
that I'm
Patriots.
kidding.
Packers on Thanksgiving. That's going to be ugly in Green Bay. But then the Jets at home the following week. They're at Houston. They could go 4-1 in the next 5 games. And if they do that, then they're in the mix in the playoff picture. I think it's unlikely, but I think writing it off as totally impossible seems a little aggressive to me.
Yeah, I think that's probably right. I think it's a difficult path, and I think that there's a slim chance of them getting back into it. But considering the state of the AFC and the fact that their offense looks very capable with Tua back, their defense I think is been a pretty decent unit. I think a lot of this was muddled because they played against a Cardinals team that is now absolutely rolling in Tua's first game back. So we're not really paying attention to the fact that the defense is playing pretty good football. So I'm willing to hear it, even if I think that the chances of them actually pulling it off are probably pretty slim. Speaking of that Patriots defense, let's get to one more bit of news from the week. The Bears have fired offensive coordinator Shane Waldron. I've said most of what I have to say about this. I think it had to happen. In terms of the timing, I think it had to happen. You look at that game on Sunday, it was one of like the 10 worst offensive performances in terms of EPA per play that the Bears have had in the last 10 years. And when you consider the fact that they're playing against the Patriots, who might be the worst team in the league, I think you could make a serious argument, even with all the offensive line injuries. It is one of the worst Bears offensive performances we've ever seen. And my first reaction to that game was, you can't do this for 2 more months with the guy you drafted number 1 overall. You can't do it, because then you're risking not only the end of this season, but what it's going to look like in 2025 and what it's going to look like moving forward. You have to do something. So I don't have a ton of faith in Thomas Brown, who just went through this in Carolina a year ago, by the way. I don't have a ton of faith in this changing in any meaningful way, but I think Derrik doing something was a necessary step for Matt Eberflus and this staff, even if I think we all know how this movie ends 8 weeks from now.
Yeah, like you said, you can't do this for 2 more months with your generational quarterback prospect that you drafted first overall. Like, there's just no way. And again, I don't know if changing anything actually, like, I don't know if Thomas Brown is going to bring the magic cure that solves this offense. Like, I don't think he's going to bring in 2 good starting guards. Like
Solve is not what
right.
I'm after.
Yeah, right. He's not going to fix the biggest problem to me remains the offensive line, even whatever issues that Waldron had, and obviously whoever they bring in now is not going to fix it. But you just have to do something to inspire some degree of change, and like, even if it's just a matter of thinking about things a little bit differently throughout the week, fine, that's enough. Even if it's Thomas Brown coming in and saying, hey, Caleb Williams, you can cut it loose a little bit more. Because if you watch Caleb, he is so tied to and anchored to the pocket in a way that he just wasn't in college.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder if getting out Waldron, Thomas Brown will be like, dude, just go make the plays that we think that you can make. And maybe that's all that they need to change. So like you said, you just could not do this for 2 more months. And I don't even really have to dig into all the Waldron of it. I think we've done that for the past month, basically.
Yeah, we've had Bears fit therapy every single show for the last 6 weeks. I'm curious, somebody who hasn't having this discussion in this space every day for the last 6 weeks, because I have to talk through my feelings. How do you feel about where this all stands and what it should look like potentially moving forward?
I mean, you normally hear like shuffling deck chairs on the Titanic as an insult, but the chairs are all strewn on the ground. Like, just putting the chairs up and sitting in them seems like it'd be a major step in the right direction. And I think you just want to avoid further harm if you're the Chicago Bears.
The only thing
we are seeing Caleb Williams regress. I mean, we're seeing him turn down throws. We're seeing him not feel confident with his reads. We're seeing him get fixated on players. We're seeing him just have a total lack of confidence. I mean, we're seeing him basically regress to the guy he was his final year at USC, which is, I'm going to, play some hero ball. I'm going to get traps in the pocket. I'm going to wait for, this concept that is not going to come open. And I just don't think that's a smart way to play football. I think if Thomas Brown can just streamline things, maybe boot more, maybe just do some more simple stuff to cut down half the field, make Caleb's decisions easier, I think that's going to be a step in the right direction. I think you want to sort of slowly build him back up because he doesn't look like a quarterback who has any confidence right now. And that is a real thing. I don't think he feels comfortable pulling the trigger on stuff. And you need to have that in your arsenal to succeed. So I think just building an offense over the rest of the year where, again, you're not going to rebuild everything from scratch. You're not going to come up with 25 new concepts. You're not going to, have 3 new offensive linemen in the lineup. But can you just build an offense where every week Caleb Williams trusts, okay, we have answers for stuff. We have answers for when teams are going to bring, 4 guys to one side of the field. We have answers for, when our pass protection breaks down. We have answers for, our running game. Having that stuff, I think, is going to be valuable. And you can do that, I think, with just recognizing what your players' strengths and weaknesses are. And I don't feel like the Bears are getting the most out of any of their playmakers. I don't feel like they've built an offense that really plays to Caleb's strengths. And that's something I think you can do over the rest of the year is just, I think sort of pare down stuff a bit, try to play to Caleb's strengths, try to get his confidence back up. And then by the end of the year, hopefully you have a quarterback who then maybe for the next staff is in better position to succeed in 2025.
I have some thoughts about quarterback situation and what quarterback situation, quote unquote, actually means. And it's something I think I want to talk about on Friday's show because we don't necessarily have the bandwidth to talk about it today. But with the Waldron part of this, there were some clips that were being circulated online today from a podcast that you and I did, Barnwell, earlier this offseason about the lingering questions we had about the NFC North. And I was talking about Shane Waldron and what that offense looked like in Seattle. And in Seattle, it was this big spread out offense with all these vertical routes from Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf. And I liked watching that offense because watching Geno Smith play that brand of football is objectively fun. But when you don't have a quarterback who's able to make those hero plays or is 10 years into his career and can carry that sort of weight and burden, the floor for the offense becomes drastically low. And I think that's part of what you're seeing here. And the idea that you're going to run a similar sort of offense, it's a little bit more spread out, that you're going to use DJ Moore on all these vertical routes you were using DK Metcalf on, all of the things that were acceptable in Seattle became detrimental in Chicago. And I think that's what you saw. There was no flexibility. There was no real interest in tailoring the offense correctly around the pieces or around the quarterback. And I think you saw what sort of high wire act they were playing in Seattle over the last couple of years. The Bears fell off the wire. And that's what it felt like over the last couple of weeks. So we'll see if Thomas Brown can act as some sort of safety net here over the next 8 weeks, because all I want and all I care about is something to prevent this thing from going splat on the concrete. That is like the only thing that matters here before we get to the end. So we'll oversee this. We'll keep an eye on this as we move forward. But for now, I think that's all we have to say about that. We're going to kick these off like we do most of our award shows. I've always said it's like the Oscars, where we don't want to go from least important to most important. We're going to throw a couple good ones up there at the top, like the best supporting actress characters or the best supporting actress categories. Let's kick this off with Offensive Player of the Year. Barnwell, you're the guest here. I'm going to give you the honors. Who is your Offensive Player of the Year 10 weeks into the season?
So this is the equivalent of like best supporting actor. Is that fair to say?
That's always the first one at the Oscars. The previous winner always awards it.
Okay, so I hate this award. Great place to start. Thank you. I hate this award because it's dumb, right? Like the idea that you have a league where an offensive player wins MVP every single season, but doesn't always win Offensive Player of the Year is stupid. I don't understand why it makes sense. Just make it not for quarterbacks. It'd be so much easier if that was the case. So my pick is not
two things. We should have a Most Outstanding Player award in the NFL, like the Heisman Trophy, where a defensive player could potentially win it, because the years where Aaron Donald and J.J. Watt would have won it, think about the content. It would have been absolutely fucking incredible. And we should have a non-quarterback Offensive Player of the Year, and we should have a Lineman of the Year award. We should have some sort of similar to like the Remington, not the Remington Award, but like what's the award for interior alignment? Isn't there? It's like the Bednarik, right? Where you can an offensive or defensive. There is an award in college football for like alignment specifically, and you can win it. And we should have one of those. That's my award rant. Outland Trophy, yes, that we should have one of those for the NFL, and the fact that we do not is an absolute tragedy. Okay, continue.
Okay. So my Offensive Player of the Year pick is on a quarterback. It is Derrick Henry, who to me is pretty clearly obvious choice. There has been no breakout receiver this year. Justin Jefferson's been really good, but I think you can eliminate most of the receivers. It's really Derrick Henry.
Jamar Chase is going to make a case here in the back half if he keeps doing
Fair.
what he's doing.
If he gets to play the Ravens every week, it's going to go a long way. But Derrick Henry and Saquon Barkley pretty clearly 1-2 for me. Saquon has had an awesome year, but there's been a few very significant mistakes. The drop against the Falcons, the sequence where he didn't pick up a 2nd and 1 and then blew a pass block and led to a field goal return for a touchdown by the Browns. Last week he fumbles, or 2 weeks ago he fumbles against the Jags and then slides down on a 2nd down check down. I mean, he's had some moments late in games that have either led to Eagles losses or put the Eagles in danger of losing. And as good as he's been, that's a separator for me because Derrick Henry has not had moments like that. Derrick Henry to me has been absolutely incredible. Like the numbers are crazy. It's almost 400 rush yards over expectations. His success rate is way above average. His first down rate is way above average. To me, I think it's pretty clearly Derrick Henry. I'll be intrigued to see if you guys have any arguments against Derrick Henry here.
I'll say this. I think part of the reason we don't see Derrick Henry making mistakes in pass protection is that the Ravens don't allow him to pass protect.
He doesn't have to.
Doesn't have to.
Or catch the ball, by the way.
Yeah. When you're killing on a 1st and 2nd down, you don't need to pass protect on 3rd down because there is no 3rd down.
Some of that I think is worth mentioning, but I'm completely with you. Derek, who did you have? Did you also have Derrick Henry?
I had Saquon Barkley actually, and this is crazy.
What
from
a traitor you are!
I know
all the amount of times you've talked about Derrick Henry over the last 5 years, and now you're going to betray him in this moment.
Listen,
I love it.
I love Derrick Henry so much. I think the game-ending runs that he has almost every week are some of the most exciting things in the league. Like you mentioned, his rush yards over expectation is like bonkers. It's going to be completely record-breaking. To me, the difference is, when I watch these two, I feel like the burden of the offense is more on Saquon Barkley. Like this Eagles team doesn't do a whole lot until Barkley has the 40-yard run where it's like, oh shit, we can move the ball now. And he immediately gets them into scoring range. And he's had one of those almost every week. That's pretty much what it comes down to. Is I just feel like the burden of the offense is more on Saquon Barkley. And when their numbers are kind of as close as they are, I'm willing to push it to that. Like, I just think when you... I think what Saquon does for the Eagles offense and unlocks for the passing offense a little bit is like basically what Lamar Jackson is doing for Derrick Henry, if that makes sense. And Derrick
the order of operations, switched.
Yes, exactly. And Henry, to his credit, is taking advantage of it to the fullest ability. I certainly don't want to take away from him, but I just feel like the burden is on Saquon Barkley a little bit more. He plays more of the snaps because he kind of has to. He's a little bit less of a limited player than Henry. So I just think because of some of the versatility that Barkley brings and being a kind of unique explosive threat, as both of them are, I wanted to slightly give him the edge because it just, again, feels like he is a little bit more responsible for the piece of the pie here in Philly.
How do you feel about that argument, Barnwell? Because I think it's very good.
It's legit. I mean, how many, what was he rescued them on a 3rd and 6 last week where Jalen just kind of got flummoxed and just oh, you take this, like hot potato to Saquon. And Saquon ran so fast past Eric Kendricks that Eric Kendricks didn't even have time to react, let alone make a tackle. He just his head moved slowly as Saquon ran by him. Yes, that is something that Saquon Barkley does that Derrick Henry does not do. And it's no disrespect to Derrick Henry. Saquon Barkley absolutely is the driving force of that Eagles offense. And that is definitely meaningful. He's much better as a receiver. I think he's better as a pass blocker. He is asked to pass block more often. He doesn't always succeed, but he's most of the time fine, I think, as a pass blocker. But you're absolutely right. I think that is a very fair argument for Saquon Barkley. And again, I wouldn't be offended if someone picks Saquon Barkley. I think Derrick Henry certainly has benefited from Lamar Jackson. I posted some place on Twitter where you can literally see edge defenders just stopping in their tracks as Derrick Henry runs by them. That is a legit thing. But I do believe that I would go with Derrick Henry, but I could see the argument for Saquon Barkley.
I think those guys are 1-2. I'm going to give it to Derrick Henry on a few different levels. I think that the numbers are crazy, right? So he has 12 carries of 20-plus yards this year. No one else has more than 8. He's averaging 2.2 rush yards over expected per carry. No one else is above 1.6. And if you think that that's a lot of big runs, which that contributes to it, right? He is 4th in the percentage of his runs that go over expectation. On almost every play, he's getting what's blocked or more in a way that like 3 other backs in the league are. So the consistency is remarkable. He's on pace for 20 rushing touchdowns this year. 20.
With Lamar Jackson in the lineup.
That's so absurd.
And this is not a good reason, but it's a reason I'm going to throw out anyway. I kind of want to give it to him in part because I feel like this is a legacy season for Derrick Henry. Like this is the year I think that is fully going to solidify Derrick Henry as like a folk hero in the history of football. Like he's been that in high school. He was that in college. What he did for those couple years in Tennessee was remarkable. But the fact that this is going to be his last act, doing this for historically good Ravens offense and potentially put him into the Hall of Fame in ways that I think very few running backs are going to have a chance to do when you look at what their production looks like historically. That's kind of what pushes it over the top for me. Is that like this is the year that Derrick Henry like truly cements his legacy as an NFL player.
You sure about this being his last act, buddy? Because I thought his last act might have been 2 years ago.
It'll still be the next few years. He's unkillable.
I just mean this is his last stop. And like what he's doing for the Ravens is probably going to be his last act as an NFL player. And I'm very, very, very happy that it looks like this and it's not some depressing petering out of his career, which I think some people thought it might be considering his age, the workload, everything else. But that's what's remarkable here is that like this guy is a superhero. Like he's like something you wrote about in like fairy tale books. Like it's fucking crazy the fact that he's still able to do this.
Dude, wait till 2026 when we have 1,200-yard Derrick Henry on the Los Angeles Chargers.
Right, he scores 20 touchdowns again in that season. I honestly think that like lifetime achievement for him is to me a more compelling argument than any of the numbers. Because again, I think some of the numbers are just like, yeah, Derrick Henry rips off home runs, and now he's in the best situation to do all that. And so it kind of makes sense that the numbers are what they are. But giving him a lifetime achievement, especially where like the past 2 years in particular, he's had to just run straight into a brick wall in Tennessee behind maybe the worst offensive line in football. Yeah, maybe he deserves a little hardware for his troubles.
Yeah,
let's get to Defensive Player of the Year. This one is.
Oh no,
I'm not.
This award.
You can literally list off 20 guys. This is a very, very difficult one. Derek, why don't you start us off here? Who did you pick and why? Because I think this is going to inspire a long discussion.
I have what is by far the most boring pick for this. It's Myles Garrett.
They're all so boring. That's the problem.
Yeah.
The problem is the exciting one, like the actual fun ones, are hard to justify, but might actually be accurate.
I'm gonna try.
The easy ones are like Myles Garrett's a perfect example. Like Myles Garrett has a really good case, and yet has he really been any better than he's been at any point over the last 5 years? I don't think so.
That's the thing. He is exactly who he's always been. Right now, according to NFL Pro, 21.5 pressure rate. It's the best in the NFL among any serious pass rusher. He has 7 sacks, which is not like leading the league right now, but it's still very good. It's almost won a game, and it'll certainly get him to 15 or whatever by the end of the season. And then just when you watch him, he is still completely unblockable. Every time it is a pure pass situation, you're like, that guy's going to be a problem. He's going to kill my quarterback, and this is not good. And so it kind of came down to when there are so many options, and there are, like you said, 20 guys I could make a case for. I kind of just defaulted to the guy who I think has been the best defender in the league for like 3 years now, and still looks that way to me. Even though he won it last year, I don't care. He's still the best guy to me.
It's not a bad argument. It's not an exciting argument, but it's not a bad argument.
Right.
All right. So Derek's going with Myles Garrett. Barnwell, who did you have?
I've got Trey Hendrickson, and it feels like a really bad pick, but he has 11 sacks. The rest of the Bengals team has 6. Like
I'm surprised it's that many.
Yeah, it's surprising it's that many. The only time they looked competent on defense has been when Trey Hendrickson has been taking games over. He had my single favorite snap of any player all season on defense against Thayer Munford a couple of weeks ago, where he. Did you see the play?
Oh yeah, he just it does it looks like you pulled one of us out of the stands to play left tackle.
It looks like Derrick Henry got to take a pass rush snap in high school. It is insane. He buries Thayer Munford, and then I think it's Desmond Ridder, a quarterback, just buries Desmond Ridder in like a matter of 2 or 3 seconds. It is
what a sad sense.
Just for sheer violence, it is so fun. But I don't think he's been any better than any Trey Hendrickson season in years past. He's been inconsistent. The defense is bad. Like the Bengals defense is not good, so it feels weird picking a guy
that's
from
a point against him. Even though it probably shouldn't be the way we wear this.
Football.
Yeah, it probably shouldn't be how we'd hand out this award, but I do think that it's going to act against him when we actually have a real conversation in January.
One of my sexy picks is also stuck on a bad defense, and I can't justify him, but I want to hear who your pick is, Mace.
But first, let me get out of the way the arguments you can make for everybody else. I think that you can make one for Myles Garrett. I think you can make one for Trey Hendrickson. I had both of those guys on my list. I think you can make one for TJ Watt. We talked about TJ Watt on the preview show last week. His actual numbers, like pass pressures, things like that, aren't that high, but it's because he's getting chipped on every single play. Like he's still impacting games in a very real way. Dexter Lawrence, like the season that Dexter Lawrence is having, Dexter Lawrence has been double teamed on 65% of plays this year. No other interior defensive lineman is above 56%. The attention he takes up and what he does when you don't put four hands on him is ridiculous. So I think he deserves mention here. Outside of Dexter Lawrence, who's fallen off a little bit over the last few weeks, all of those are so boring, right? We're just going to give it to the most productive edge rusher again in a year where there isn't really like a transcendent player doing something incredibly special. So that's why, out of either sheer boredom or just to do something different, I'm going with Brian Branch. I think
that's not who I was expecting.
I think going to hit compared to his peers at the position, he is impacting games in as much of an outlier way as we've seen from like the best defensive linemen over the last few years and how they impact games. If you look at True Media has a stat called splash plays, which is essentially it's TFLs, it's PBUs, it's interceptions, all that stuff. And it inherently, defensive linemen are going to have more opportunities to do that. Throwaways is in there, essentially just offensive plays you snuff out. Brian Branch is easily number one in the league in splash plays per snap for defensive backs. It's like 15. And he's right in there with defensive linemen, linebackers, everything. What he is able to do as a run defender, as a versatile pass defender in playing nickel, playing safety, and his ability to get production on the ball this year, I think that he has like a very serious argument as the most outstanding defensive player in the league when you think about what he's doing compared to what other defensive backs are doing. And I think with how muddled the rest of the race is, just again, to do something different, I just wanted to mention him compared to some of the other guys.
I think that's a good, fun answer because we talked about, I think even maybe on last Sunday's show, Brian Branch is pretty firmly like the all-pro safety to me. Like, I don't even think it's really close. Like maybe Jesse Bates is going to get close, but right now Branch is firmly in that category. There are at least 2 or 3 plays a game where he makes, whether it's on third down and he's driving on a crosser and he just bats it over the guy's shoulder, or he makes a interception in the red zone, or he gets to the perimeter in the run game. Like he is, in terms of fitting every single box as a safety and checking every role. And like, even if they need to roll him down and play man coverage, he will. Obviously he played a little bit of that at Alabama in his rookie year. Like he is just, it seems crazy to say that a safety might be the defensive player of the year, but this is probably the best case that a safety has had in, I don't know how long.
I mean, Hamilton, Charles Woodson year, right?
Yeah. Or maybe like Hamilton last year. Like
Hamilton last year probably had a real case too. Yeah.
When I was going to say my sexy pick on a bad team, Jesse Bates was that idea, because you hear about teams, deliberately designing stuff to avoid him. He's had big plays late in games to win games. I mean, again, is he playing significantly better than he did last year? I can't say, but he has been a phenomenal football player just on a defense that has one of the worst pass rushes we have ever seen. I think the best defensive player on a snap-by-snap basis has been Pat Surtain. And to me, if you are looking for a cornerback and you're saying, okay, what does a perfect season for a cornerback look like? Pat Surtain is inhibiting targets at an extremely high rate. When he's being thrown at, he has a 50.1 passer rating. He has three interceptions, including a 100-yard pick six. He, according to Pro Football Reference, does not have a single missed tackle all season. He plays in a defense that plays man at one of the highest rates in football.
Because of him. And what they did when he wasn't in the lineup is hilarious. Yes. They decided they weren't going to play man that game.
Of course not. Of course not. Why would you? The only issue is that he missed basically 2 games. He got hurt the first snap of the Chargers game, suffered a concussion, missed all of that game, and missed the following week. If he had played every snap, he would be my clear pick as defensive player of the year. As it stands, I think it's tough to miss 2 games. If he misses anything more, I think he's out of it. But to me, I think snap to snap, he's been the best player in the league on defense.
Brian Branch, that similar sort of thing. He got kicked out halfway through the Packer game and missed the game earlier, so that's also a knock against him. But
that's fine.
I love the Surtain argument. He is in a league that doesn't have shutdown corners anymore. He's the only one of one right now. Like, I don't think Sauce is currently playing at that level. And like Jalen Ramsey is still good. He's not at that level right now. He is the only guy where, kind of like Maze was saying, you play man coverage. because that guy is going to just completely erase somebody and we don't have to think about it.
Fun little tease here. We actually have an entire podcast coming out this weekend about the state of superstar cornerbacks in the NFL and where Pat Surtain fits into this and why that market has unfolded in the way that it has over the last couple of years. So little special extra episode that we're going to be dropping on Saturday. So please go listen to that if you were interested in this discussion. Let's get to our next one here. Offensive Rookie of the Year. I don't think we have to spend a ton of time on this. Like, it's Jaden Daniels, right? Does anybody have any sideways arguments they want to make?
Brock Bowers is having a historic year for a tight end.
That's the one. I think because these are narrative awards and it's almost always going to get defaulted to the quarterback. And Jaden Daniels obviously is playing at like a historic level for a rookie quarterback, so I don't want to take that away from him. And we saw last year, even when Puka Nacua literally broke records as a rookie receiver, it didn't matter because the quarterback who played as like the 9th best quarterback in the league, that's enough to win it. So narratively, it's going to go to Jaden Daniels and he deserves it. In terms of who is the best rookie among their peers at the position, I think it is pretty obviously Brock Bowers. He leads the league in receiving for tight ends as a rookie. Like, that just does not happen. We kind of came into his as a draft prospect, we were like, when everything works out, maybe he can be like George Kittle. The guy he is ahead of in receiving right now today is George Kittle. It's him and George Kittle. Like, he is everything we wanted
trash
him to be
cans
already.
They put a quarterback this year.
Right, exactly. You just mentioned Desmond Ridder 5 minutes ago, and that was only for like a few quarters that he's had to deal with that. But the other guys were Gardner Minshew and Aiden O'Connell. And the fact that, one, those guys have already trusted him so much and just thrown him the ball. But also, you just watch the way the offense is designed. Like, they throw a lot of design stuff. They throw screens at him. Like, how many tight ends really get that many screens thrown at them? It's not that many. But he's just a special
good point.
case.
Building your passing game through the tight end. Kelsey's really the only other one we've seen in recent years where he is the focal point because of what sort of talent that he is.
And,
so in the doc here, you have an asterisk next to Jaden Daniels' name. Was that the asterisk? Is because he's going to get it, but you were actually going to give it to Brock Bowers?
Yes, the asterisk is, I know it's a narrative award. It'll go to the quarterback, and Jaden Daniels is great. But, like, who is the best player at their position right now relative to other players? It's Brock Bowers.
Yeah, and
it's a good
you
argument.
also see on scramble drills, when the Raiders are in scramble drills, Brock Bowers is the guy they go to. And that is true for maybe Kelsey, maybe Trey McBride last year, but that is not commonly a spot for tight ends. And that, I think, that is a real testament to how great he is at just having an innate sense of space, getting open, and then, separating from players in scramble drills.
This is also a stupid addition to the argument. Look at what Georgia is as an offense right now this year. They are significantly worse on offense this year. Carson Beck doesn't look like a first-round quarterback anymore. Brock Bowers, man, he makes your offense. He does a lot.
All that being said, you're giving it to Jaden Daniels, right?
I mean, it's hard not to, yeah.
Of course.
He's been one of the most efficient quarterbacks in the league as a rookie. Like, it's harder to have a more obvious offensive rookie of the year season than Jaden Daniels is having right now, even when you consider what Brock Bowers is doing, which is remarkable. A few other guys I think worth throwing out just to acknowledge what sort of seasons that they've had. Joe Alt is already a good NFL tackle as a rookie. Malik Neighbors, before the concussion, was absolutely destroying. It's been a little bit down since, and their quarterback play is getting increasingly bad. So I think that's going to affect his numbers, but Malik Neighbors is an incredible talent. Brian Thomas looks awesome. Like, I already love watching Brian Thomas. Like, the idea of Brian Thomas, so smooth. And that was when coming in, the biggest question about him was like, okay, we know the speed is there. We know the explosiveness is there. That wiggle that he has, that flexibility, is that going to result in route running productivity and in route running fluidity in the NFL? The answer was immediately yes. It wasn't like halfway through his rookie year. It didn't take him a year and a half to figure it out. The answer was immediately yes. Like, the best case for who Brian Thomas could be as an NFL player happened like 4 weeks into the season, which is very cool to see. And then the other guy I wanted to throw out, because you talk about performance compared to expectations, Dominic Pooney has been so good for the Niners. Like, the fact that he is a legitimately good NFL guard as a mid-round rookie is very impressive. So those are like the 5 guys I feel like are worth mentioning, even we're just going to throw the award at Jaden Daniels.
I would say before the injury, I think Zach Frazier would have been the discussion.
Yeah, Zach Frazier is another really good one. Yes.
And Marvin Harrison Jr. has also been incredible this year. Like, he probably will not end up winning the award, but I don't know. If him and Kyler continue to play, they've played the way the last 3 weeks, he might have a discussion at the end.
Yeah, Marvin Harrison Jr. is another good one too. I also think that they're figuring out the right ways to use him, right?
Oh,
like, sticking him outside of the numbers and having him run a bunch of fades. it's probably not the best answer. And so with what we've seen from the Cardinals offense over the last couple of weeks, I think has been really encouraging for what his production could look like over the final 2 months of the season.
Yep.
Defensive Rookie of the Year, feel like this is kind of similar. It might even be more clear-cut than Offensive Rookie of the Year is. Barnwell, you had Jared Verse in your column last week. Has anything that's happened over the last week or so dissuaded you from picking Jared Verse?
Maybe Braden Fisk is the only guy who comes up because Braden Fisk was awesome against the Seahawks. Oh man, I was like taking notes in the game and I like had to stop 5 times to be like, holy shit, Braden Fisk over and over again. And Jared Verse had big plays as well in that game. He had the 4th and 1 stop where he busted through 2 players to stop Kenneth Walker. Those dudes are awesome. I think Jared Verse is the clear pick, but Braden Fisk was awesome as well. That has been so fun to watch them develop into kind of core players for the Rams defense.
Derek, did you also have Jared Verse?
It's kind of almost like the Offensive Rookie of the Year. It kind of has to be Jared Verse, and he's been awesome. I mean, he's just, I think maybe I said this on a different show, but he is just one of those guys where, as a defensive end, my favorite guys to watch are the ones where I look at them and go, you should be a Baltimore Raven or you should be a New England Patriot. Like just the long, mean, run through a tackle's face, like that type of player.
Yep.
And Jared Verse obviously has that, like his intensity, his strength, just how smart he is sniffing some of this stuff out. He's been incredible. So like, this award is almost more interesting as far as like who are the guys who might get close by the end. And to me, they both play in Philly. I think it's both Quinyon Mitchell and Cooper DeJean. Like I think by the end, those guys might have a case. But right now, it's pretty firmly Jared Verse.
Jared Verse is tied for 5th in pressures among all players in the NFL this year. He has 43 pressures according to PFF. On a per snap basis, Pro Football Focus has a stat called pass rush productivity, which is like a rate stat. He is 1 spot ahead of Myles Garrett and like how often he's affecting the quarterback. And we did a show before the season, Derek, where we were talking about DNA changers in the NFL, guys who were going to be dropped onto units and they were going to change the feel of that unit. And I had Jared Verse as one of mine. And it seems like, man, a rookie is going to come in and change the way a defense feels. Yes. Like that's exactly what he's done for the Rams. You watch it last night. He's getting chipped over and over and over again. Like the Dolphins are building their pass protection plan around this guy who is 10 weeks into his career. And I absolutely love watching him. He just, the style that he plays with, the power that he plays with, he is already just such a fun watch and such an impactful player. So I think that Quinyon Mitchell is probably number 2. Cooper DeJean is going to make some ground up here over the next couple months, but I think that Jared Verse is absolutely the answer right now. Let's get to the next one here. This is one that's a little bit, I don't know if you did this in your column, Barnwell.
I did not.
Executive of the Year. I think that there's also a bunch of guys that probably could make a case for this one. Who would you pick for Executive of the Year 10 weeks into the season?
I think I would pick Adam Peters, and I know that's going to be Jaden Daniels hype, and I don't want to double count that for Adam Peters, but I would throw in the other guys they've added. I mean, think about someone like Tyler Biotish, who has been really impressive for them at center. They found like Noah Igbenogany is playing fine for them in the slot. A guy who's bounced around the league. Dorrance Armstrong, according to ESPN's, I think pass rush win rate is in the top 6 for pressure rate. They go and sign Noah Brown when he gets cut by the Texans at the end of camp, and he's been good for them at receiver. He's been solid for them. Not great, but he's been a solid number 2 wide receiver, which is exactly what they needed. They have just found useful players on the bottoms of rosters or given guys bigger roles in Washington, and they have generally panned out and played better this year than they did in other places.
He's also my pick. Derek, who did you have?
Same thing. And like there were 1 or 2 other guys I was maybe going to give like a shout out to, but I think it is pretty firmly Adam Peters. I mean, we didn't even mention Mike Sainer still. Like, drafting him and him being what he's been this year has been truly incredible. I just think almost all the moves that they've made have Jeremy Chin, like that's another one. Like it just seems like almost all of the for absolutely nothing. Like almost all of the signings that they made, and even a lot of their draft picks have just worked out. Newton at defensive tackle has also been good. Like almost every move that you can think that they made this offseason has kind of worked out, which is crazy. When I mean personally, I came into the offseason questioning a majority of these moves, maybe not the draft picks, rookies are rookies, and we'll see about that stuff. But a lot of the signings they made, I wasn't that excited about. And lo and behold, they're one of the best teams in the conference.
We'll talk about why the lot of pieces on the offense look as good as they do here when we're handing out a couple more of these awards in a second. He's my pick because of exactly what you just said, Derek. Anybody else you can make a case for, there's one misstep, right? Like Howie Roseman, the Bryce Huff contract doesn't look great. Kwesi Adofo-Mensah, I like a lot of the free agent signings they had on offense. All the picks that they gave away, I think we can quibble with how that's going to work out over the next 3 or 4 years. Brett Holmes has had a rock solid year. Like so many of the things that they did, the Carlton Davis trade, Terrion Arnold, even like Amik Robertson. What Amik Robertson has given them as like a slot corner so they can move Brian Branch around, DJ Reader, bringing in Kevin Zeitler, like just another rock solid year for Brad Holmes. But I think all of that is true for Adam Peters, like the small free agent signings, the incremental things they did on the margins. And he just drafted a guy who is like in the legitimate MVP conversation as a rookie as the second overall pick. That's what puts it over the top for me. You have that sort of game-changing force that you dropped into it with the second overall pick. And then even some of the other draft picks, like I've talked about this a bunch. Brandon Coleman in the 3rd round. I'm so intrigued by Brandon Coleman, and not just what he is as a left tackle, but the plan they've had for him and just how intentional it's been. And there's just so much thought, I think, put into so many of these moves and what they wanted this roster to look like. Adam Peters deserves so much credit for turning this thing around in one single year. And like you said, Derrik, I think it is about a lot more than just Jaden Daniels. So from executive of the year to assistant coach of the year, I don't think you did this one either, did you, Barnwell? You just did the major ones. We're really slacking over there.
Yeah, you know what? I'm not going to do weird awards. I'm saving that for podcasts.
Well, you have the floor, sir.
We're meat and potatoes.
Coach of the year.
We're meat and potatoes only over at ESPN.com. This was tough for me. I think I narrowed it down to 2.
It's a really hard one.
I felt like I was giving out too many awards to Commanders, which maybe is annoying to Commanders fans. So I tried not to include Cliff, although I think Cliff has done really well. But narrowed it down to Brian Flores and Jesse Minter. And I think I went with Brian Flores just because I'm still a little nervous about the quality of quarterbacks the Chargers have played. I mean, they're like the stuff they're getting out of players is insane. Like Tarheeb Still has been awesome at cornerback. Like they're getting they are a legit top 3 defense with Joey Bosa playing like 12% of the snaps this year. It is insane what they are doing. But Brian Flores, I mean, so much fun to watch. He's been winning them games. They have been, the most entertaining defense to watch. They're getting more out of players. They're, again, another team where they're bringing in guys, and those guys are playing better and being better used than they were elsewhere. And that, to me, is the definition of a good coach. So I can't imagine there's a ton of arguments against Flores, but I'd like to hear what you guys think about who should win this award.
He was the second person on my list, and Jesse Minter was 3rd. So you're not going to have a lot of pushback from me. And last year, the Vikings were doing a ton of interesting stuff, but it fell off a little bit at the end of the year, and they just didn't have the horses to make it work. Now they're doing a lot of interesting things, and they're truly the best defense in the league when you look at the metrics. Like, they are the NFL's best defense down to down, and they have better talent this year. But it's not like they have superstars at every single position. The starting corners they signed off the street this season, this offseason. They're like guys in their 30s that they signed for very cheap 1-year deals. And the fact that they've been able to build this sort of system out of those sorts of moves, I think says so much about the job that Brian Flores has done. So I have no issue with that whatsoever. Where did you go with this, Derrik?
I considered all of those people. Certainly Brian Flores. I think I got really close to actually picking him. I ended up going with Aaron Glenn, and maybe this is me just like
the least surprising decision of all time.
Yeah, this is me just like leaning into how much I've loved Aaron Glenn for so long. But this was a defense where I was like, I hope they can take the leap into the back end of the top 10. And I think so far this season, they've actually been closer to like a top 5 defense, especially pretty much everything after the Seattle game. They have certainly been that unit. And I think what really puts it over the top for me is like, so early on, a lot of it was just Aiden Hutchinson was maybe the defensive player of the year, and that was certainly helping them a lot. But I think what you're really seeing is like this secondary, and I know some of the penalties are really frustrating, especially from Terrion Arnold, but it's because of the way they play, where they're playing
cost of doing business.
Yes, you're playing so tight to routes, you're playing so much man coverage, you're playing so much press that like you're just up in everyone's face. Eventually, you're going to get penalties. But I just think the way that they pass stuff off, like if you watch the way they play bunches. Like Carlton Davis is always driving on stuff the way that he's supposed to. It's always distributed perfectly. You have Brian Branch taking another step where he looks like the best safety in the league. Kirby Joseph is like picking off 1 million passes. Terrion Arnold, again, I know the penalties are frustrating, but like down to down, he is actually a tight coverage player. And Aaron Glenn, he's a former defensive back. When he was with the Saints, I swear he got better play out of just random guys off the street than you were ever supposed to get. And I think you're seeing that development on the back end currently. And so for them to get what they've gotten out of this secondary, You add some of the play they're getting up from the guys up front, where a lot of them are playing some of the best ball they've ever played, like Aleem McNeil,
They've had
Aiden
so many
Hutchinson.
injuries.
Right.
The
And
fact
they're
they've had
still
so many
good.
injuries they've had to deal with up front, and they've still been one of the best defenses in the league.
Yes, that's exactly it. So again, I know this is probably at least like 30% me just leaning on the guy I kind of wanted to win the award coming in, but I really do think his unit and the job that he's done has been pretty exceptional.
Yeah.
He was on my list. I had him and Ben Johnson. You could
Yeah,
easily
yep,
give this
I
award
also-
to
yeah.
Ben Johnson if you wanted to.
Sure.
But
Sure.
At this point, Ben Johnson has been a good assistant coach for so long. We almost never have this in the league where you can be a good offensive coordinator solely for long enough for people to get fatigued of how good you are as an offensive coordinator. But that's actually where Ben Johnson has arrived to. So I had both of those guys, Brian Flores, Jesse Minter. Coaching is about getting the most with the least, right? It's about how much of a multiplier you are for the guys on your side of the ball. And I think Jesse Minter has as good an argument as anybody for what he has done with that group. You mentioned Tarheeb Still, Barnwell. Cam Hart is playing good football for them. What Ogbonia is doing, and Puna Ford, and just the linebacking core, the communication on the back end of that defense is just absolutely phenomenal. You can tell how well they are coached, and I really enjoy watching them play. A couple other guys I think we're throwing out. Todd Monken and what that Ravens offense looks like this year.
No
I think Jeff Halfley is doing a really good job in Green Bay as they've kind of figured out and sorted through some of the issues that they're working with. What Drew Petzing is doing in Arizona with that offense right now is very impressive. All of that being said, I'm still giving it to Cliff Kingsbury.
Oh,
And
I thought you were naming someone else.
No, I'm still going with Cliff Kingsbury. And maybe it's because I've watched so much of that Washington offense that there's just so many moments in my head about like, oh, that's good shit, man. Oh, that's good shit. Like it happens so often because I think I'm just drawn to watching that unit because of how many interesting things that they're doing. And if coaching is about getting the most with the least, and it's about elevating the players that you have, how many people thought that Washington's supporting cast coming into the season was the worst one in the league? A lot of people.
Certainly the offensive line I thought would be bottom 5.
And even with McLaurin, what else do they have at receiver? Right? They brought in fucking Zach Ertz and Austin Eckler. Like those are the moves that they made on offense. And Brandon Thorne, who does a very good job kind of monitoring offensive line play in the league and doesn't really have a lot of dogs in the fight. He's a pretty objective arbiter of these things. He had Washington dead last. Their offensive line dead last. And they have played not like a decent offensive line. They've been like a legitimately good unit this year. And I think that's in part because of the plan, the pass protection plan, the designs in the run game. He's done a phenomenal job. And I think it might be the amount of exposure I've had to it because I consistently find myself watching them, but I'm giving it to him. We'll see what it looks like over the second half of the season if some teams get a beat on some of the stuff that they're doing. But right now, up to this point, I just think that he has done the best job elevating the players that he has been given of any assistant in the league.
Yeah, I would just throw out the number of answers it feels like Jaden Daniels has on every single play. Like how often does he have an open receiver coming across his face? How often does he have an answer for pressure? How often does he have answers for everything defenses are throwing at him? And I feel like, there isn't the best set of players. There's some drops. There's some stuff that happens, but there are always answers for him in the passing game. And then how many running backs has this team unlocked so far this year? It's not even Austin Eckler. Jeremy McNichols is playing like
their run game is
solid
so
NFL
cool,
running back.
man.
It's so
what
good.
They're doing with Sam Cosmi and just all the stuff that they have with the gaps.
We're going to talk about Sam Cosmi.
It's so many. I love what they're doing. And so I'm just very tempted to give it to him. I think he's done a really impressive job. And this isn't like, oh, they were supposed to be bad and they're like the 8th best offense in the league. They would probably have a chance to be the most efficient offense in football in most seasons. Unfortunately, the Baltimore Ravens of 2024 exist. Yes. So it's knocked them off the top perch.
Can I throw one guy out there who nobody mentioned and I thought might be your answer?
I'm surprised because I mentioned 17 guys, but yes, you certainly can.
Spags? Crazy to think that Spags should win this award.
That's like a lifetime achievement thing.
Right.
But he deserves it. He does deserve it. They're incredible.
We forgot him. It's so telling that I was just like, oh, I'm going to name half the league and then forget Steve Spagnuolo because, again, we know what he is. It's not sneaking up on you anymore. It's not exciting or sexy, but you're absolutely right. He probably does deserve mention here. Speaking of mentioning half the league and people who are deserving of awards, let's get to Coach of the Year. Derrik, I'm going to let you kick this one off. Who are you going with halfway through the season here?
There were definitely a lot I debated. And I'll say that the one I actually came the closest to that I think maybe it's not in like a lot of top 3 or 5s, but like I really, really wanted to pick Matt LaFleur. Like I got really, really close because of what he's done specifically, like in the Malik Willis games, hiring a guy like Jeff Hafley, who you said is fixing the defense a little bit. It's like, man, I just feel like he did a really great job. However, I'm just defaulting to Mike Tomlin, man. I mean, this team is the Steelers are 7-2, and I think the defense is mostly what it's you can expect from out of a Steelers defense. But like for them to be 7-2, where your 2 quarterbacks are guys that were thrown away by their other franchises, in Justin Fields, who like obviously was a bust, didn't work out in Chicago, and then Russell Wilson, who is signing for the minimum after being paid like $1 trillion in Denver. Those are your 2 quarterbacks, and you're 7-2. And you've had offensive line injuries like all up and down throughout the entire season. Your best pass catcher is George Pickens, and everything after that is like it almost non-existent. Like you're throwing to guys like Van Jefferson, Roman Wilson, who you drafted, basically has not played this year. You're getting a lot of snaps out of like Darnell Washington, who, look, I love dearly, not the best and most threatening pass catcher, especially in space. Like the fact that this team is 7-2 and it feels like relatively sustainable, at least as much as it can be with these quarterbacks.
They're a top 10-ish team this year. This is not like smoke and
legitimately.
mirrors like it has been in years past.
Last year it was bullshit, right? Last
Barnwell,
year
you
it was
said this in your
completely
column,
bullshit.
right? Like Pythagorean wins, like typically they would do some weird nonsense where they should win 2 games and they've won 7. Right now, if you look at everything, they are exactly the type of team that all of the underlying metrics would lead you to believe. And I think that's what feels a little bit different about the Steelers team.
Yeah, I mean, their defense has been legitimately great. And like you said, TJ Watt's playing really well, but even the guys across from him, Alex Highsmith has been awesome. Nick Herbig was awesome before he got hurt. And excited to see him play, unfortunately, now that Highsmith is injured again. But like Beanie Bishop has been a useful player for them from day one. Dante Jackson, who was going to get cut by the Panthers, has been good for them.
Patrick Queen.
Patrick Queen was unbelievable.
Incredible.
It's unbelievable.
Incredible in that Commanders game. And like, yes, the offense is not fantastic, but to Derrick's point, like the bar is set pretty low, and they have been functional. They've upped their 12 and 13 usage with Arthur Smith. They're running the ball more effectively. Najee Harris has been the best football of his career to my eyes. And they're just like, it's less bullshit than it has been before. They are. Yeah. There's been a little bit of bullshit, but like that Cowboys game where they forced 2 fumbles, they had a 3rd fumble at the 1-yard line. If they had won that game, I would have been like, yes, that is bullshit. They did not win that game. They lost that game, and they are still 7-2. They are a really impressive football team, and week after week, like they're forcing teams to play the way they want to play, the way the Steelers want them to play, and I think that's really, really impressive. Tomlin was my pick as well.
I think the person you should listen to the most in terms of the job Mike Tomlin is doing this year is Mike Tomlin. Mike Tomlin is feeling himself right now.
Oh, sure.
Think about what we've gotten from Mike Tomlin over the last month. He puts in Russell Wilson. Everyone's questioning it. It is objectively the correct move after you look at what the offense has been with Russell Wilson. He gets asked about it, and his response is, "That's why I'm well compensated." 2 weeks later, after a huge play, he does the fucking Jim Halpert to the TV camera, like winking at it. And then did you see what he did today? They asked him about Deontay Johnson and preparing for Deontay Johnson, and his response was, "I haven't seen a lot of him on the video. There are other guys who've been more of a priority for us."
Did you hear him on Sunday when they asked him if they were actually going to run a play on 4th and 1?
Yeah, he's like, "Yeah, I'll never tell you." Isn't that what he said? He's like, "You'll never know."
He said, I'll never tell you. You know I'm a degenerate, though. Incredible. Incredible.
So I think we should listen to that. But on a serious note, I also picked Mike Tomlin. And
great.
One of the reasons is that I think that sometimes we forget what it really means to be a great coach in the NFL. And what it really means to be a great coach in the NFL, I think, is twofold as a head coach. One, it's about consistency. What are you bringing every single year over and over and over again? And I reached out to someone on that staff today because I knew we were going to have this conversation. And I just asked him, what has stuck out to you about Mike Tomlin? And the first thing he said to me was, he's never gotten tired of the process. He never, ever gets tired of it. And I think that is just, that's so right. And the other words that they used were practical and consistent. He's just so consistent and so practical. If you don't play a certain way, you are not going to play here. And the ability for him to force teams to play the way they want Barnwell, but also for him to be able to get the most out of his team and for them to have a certain feel to the way that they play. I think that is just so impressive. And 18 years in, the fact that he's still able to imbue his team with that sort of approach, mindset, production, performance is so impressive. And this is a little bit of a lifetime achievement award, but I think that you can make an argument that he's done as good a job this year as he has in any of the previous years where we've had this sort of discussion about Mike Tomlin. So he is also my pick. You can name 10 guys. I think that Matt LaFleur absolutely deserves mention after what he did in a couple of those Malik Willis games and just who he is every single week at this point. Dan Quinn has done an unbelievable job in Washington at setting that program on the right direction. Dan Campbell in Detroit. Everything you can say about Dan Campbell every year, you can say about him again this year. What Jim Harbaugh has done with the Chargers. If I was picking a second guy, Jim Harbaugh would be my second guy. Like what the Chargers feel like right now compared to what the Chargers have felt like over the last couple of years while shedding talent actively and then getting better is fucking crazy. Like that is all coaching. That's all it is. That's the entirety of what you're seeing from the Chargers. If it's a controlled study, they got worse and they're better because of the coach that they brought in. It's nuts. Andy
Not sure
Reid,
that qualifies as a controlled study for scientific purposes. If you're a scientist listening to
it's as close as we'll get in the NFL.
it's as close as we'll
That's
get.
fair.
Right? Like
That's fair.
Andy Reid absolutely deserves mention here. And Jonathan Gannon, I think, has done a very good job in Arizona. And the last guy who I think is never going to get mentioned for this award, and this is the year where we actually should talk about him, is Sean McDermott.
Yes.
I actually, he would have been third for me, actually. I also really considered him.
This was supposed to be like a soft reset year for the Bills. It has not been a soft reset year for the Bills. Their defense is still very good as they've shuffled out how many guys. They announced that Matt Milano was going to be back. He was coming back to practice. I was like, oh yeah, Matt Milano's hurt.
And it doesn't matter because Terrell Bernard is playing well and Dorian Williams suddenly looks like a player now. Like they always find the next guy. And
they've been hurt too, and the Bills have been fine when they haven't either of those guys. Insane. Absolutely insane. We're going to talk about more Bills actually later on in this show, I believe.
All right, so we're going to have one more headline award, and then we're going to hit a couple quicker ones at the end. Let's get to MVP. I think we all have the same MVP pick. Barnwell, I will let you make your case first. Who did you pick for the MVP 10 weeks into the year?
I picked Lamar Jackson because I've watched the NFL for 10 weeks, and I think if anyone picks not Lamar Jackson, they're insane. I will throw one stat out there, and then I will cede the floor. Through 10 weeks, since 2000, passers who have played 9 or more games and their highest first down rates as passers. Tom Brady in 2007, he won MVP. Peyton Manning in 2013, he won MVP. Jared Goff in 2018. Peyton Manning in 2004 won MVP. Peyton Manning in 2005 was second in the MVP race. And Lamar Jackson in 2024. That would have been insane to imagine as a passer even 2 years ago. Lamar Jackson is absolutely picking people apart as a passer. He would be the MVP with 0 rushing yards. And that is something we could not have said about either of his awards in years past.
I have no counter argument. Lamar Jackson is also my pick. Lamar Jackson has been the best player in the NFL this year. Lamar Jackson has been the most impactful player in the NFL this year. He is a version of Lamar Jackson that we have never seen. If you look at all of the markers that typically dictate whether people win the MVP, which last year is the exception, we could talk about that if we want to. The fact that it might be hard to give him this after giving it to him last year, when I have a regret that I didn't fight for Josh Allen harder than I did last year, because he probably should have won it if we were actually giving it to the most valuable player in the league. But what Lamar has done this year, total EPA, all of the efficiency numbers, for me, it's the improvements that he's made in some of the areas of his game where he used to be lacking. The fact that he went from one of the worst quarterbacks in the league when blitzed over the last 3 years to arguably the best quarterback in the league. He feels like he has the game in the palm of his hand now in a way that he never did even when he was winning MVP awards. And a guy with his level of talent, the fact that that's the control that now seems to be exhibited all of the time is fucking terrifying. Like he has just reached an entirely new plane, and I didn't really know that that was even possible for him.
First of all, that's why I don't feel bad about, potentially giving him back to back. Like with Myles Garrett, it's like, well, he's just always been that guy, and it's kind of wide open, whatever. Lamar Jackson is legitimately a different player, and I think why it's so impressive is, like, in some theoretical world, like, Lamar Jackson could have gotten better against the blitz, and his numbers could have been better if, like, they traded for AJ Brown and he can just go throw a bunch of go balls, and it's like, wow, that solves everything. That's not what happened. Like, they pretty much just have all of the same players here, at least as far as pass catchers. Obviously, they bring in Derrick Henry, who does help the offensive ecosystem a little bit. But
and their offensive line shedded talent.
Right, they lost guys.
Starters.
Yes. And like they have been, and like their starting right tackle was not even their starting right tackle in week 1, Roger Rosengarten. He's a rookie right now. Like, it's just everything Lamar is playing with right now is so impressive. And he's doing it, like you said, with more control. What he's been given pre-snap in year 2 of the Todd Monken offense, he's just doing so much more with having control at the line of scrimmage, being able to set protections, being able to shift guys in and out. If he sees man coverage and knows we can beat him this way, or he knows he's hot, okay, I'm going to bring 7 into the protection and we're just going to beat it that way. Like, his ability to do all of that, I think, has really taken his game to the next level. The other thing is, he is a better runner than he has been in years past, actually.
He's more explosive.
He is so much
He
faster.
is more explosive this year than he was last year. I don't even think it's a conversation.
I think he said himself, like, I was out of shape the past 2 or 3 years, which is like relative, right? He was still one of the best 5 athletes.
He actively added weight because he wanted to hold up a little bit better and not get hurt. But him shedding the weight into this season, he looks more explosive. He absolutely does. And that has been so important in him avoiding people in the pocket.
Yes.
That is where it's shown up more than what he's done as a runner. The fact that he's just making people look ridiculously stupid in the pocket when making free runners miss, that's an area of his game where, again, it just feels like he has total control of how the game is being played every single week.
Yeah, so I think it just has to be Lamar.
Yeah, my favorite Lamar snap of the entire year is such a dumb snap, but I love it so much. It was against the Bucks. It was the 2nd and 15, and they called like a slip screen to the running back, Justice Hill, and the Bucks blew it up. And like 2nd and 15, that's a bad situation for a lot of teams. That is a we're giving up situation for like 20 teams in the NFL. The Bucks blew up that screen for another 9 or 10 teams. That is the end of the play. Lamar just slips out the backside for 17 yards, like easy as can be, totally untouched, never in any danger, just creates an explosive as like an afterthought. That is just, there is only one player on the planet playing that way, and that's Lamar Jackson.
I think the other guys you probably should mention, Josh Allen is having another fantastic year. Patrick Mahomes and what he's being asked to do with that offense, especially in like high leverage moments on 3rd down, has been incredibly important for what the Chiefs ecosystem is. So I think he should be mentioned. Jared Goff is, probably was in the conversation before throwing 5 interceptions last week, but this isn't really close to me. Like, I think that Lamar has distanced himself from everybody else. Jaden Daniels, you probably throw in there too, but I feel like the gap between Lamar and everybody else is as wide as it's been in a couple years for this MVP discussion. So I don't really feel the need to entertain that many other options right now.
Yeah, I think the only concern is maybe will you have MVP voters who think Derrick Henry should win this award, and so you have a split between Ravens offensive players.
I can understand how some people may think that way. I'm not hearing that, though. I would be surprised. And again, the bar he has to clear to win back-to-back is incredibly high. He's clearing it by like 10 feet. Like it's not even close. It's time for Made Up Awards. A few other things we just want to talk about as we're trying to tell the story of the season, which I think is always what I've tried to do when we hand out awards. The first one here, Barnwell, pleasant surprise. Like the thing that you just feel like you've enjoyed more through the first half of the season than you might have expected coming into the year.
I'll throw a few players out there. I don't know if you want to extend this to concepts or teams, but I'll just go with some players.
It was a wide open category for a reason. It's essentially however you wanted to fill it in.
So players that come to mind for me, Sam Cosmi, who we mentioned earlier. Like if you want to pick a player I was not expecting to be like an all-pro candidate on the Commanders, that's the guy who comes to mind for me. Every week I'm like,
he's the right guard.
Who is this dude?
Yeah.
Like did like Brandon Scherf, like prime Brandon Scherf get back on the Commanders and I didn't realize
he moves better than prime Brandon Scherf.
It is incredible to see this dude play. Gregory Rousseau came to mind for me as a player where
I absolutely wanted to mention him on one of the ones we're talking about.
He has like five good pressures every single week, and whenever there's a big play, like whenever there's a strip sack on the Bills, like I'm just waiting for his name to be called, and it gets called. And then I think the obvious one, and I'm sure I don't know how I feel about this guy necessarily as an All-Pro candidate, but Zach Bond, Where on earth did Zach Bond turn into? Like he's having the Devontae Campbell season to me in terms of like that guy, like every week that guy is making plays. It's incredible to me. So those are the three players who came to mind for me as pleasant surprises.
This is very funny because we have another category that it's probably too muddled and they're not different enough in the way that I explain them. But another one that we're doing is kind of narrative changing players and like what they've done. Zach Bond and Greg Rousseau were on my list for that. So I think both of them probably deserve mention here. Derrik, your biggest pleasant surprise halfway through the year, who is it or what is it?
We've already kind of talked about it in a few different categories here, but to me, it's the Chargers defense. I mean, I'm just so pleasantly surprised watching what they were. Like, I thought when Jim Harbaugh came in and you bring in Greg Roman, you drafted an offensive tackle. I'm like, okay, they'll get the offense to a high floor and Justin Herbert's incredible. And maybe the defense will look a little bit more put together. But I just didn't think that with the talent that they had, that they would be like a top 6 type of defense where they are truly suffocating offenses week to week. And they're getting the most out of almost every single player, whether it's some of the free agents like Poona Ford, obviously bringing back Denzel Perriman, or it's just some of the rookies that they've drafted, like Cam Hart, Tariq Steele, we've mentioned. Junior Colson, when he's had to play, has been solid. Like, they're just...
We're watching Deion Henley and what Deion Henley is like this year. They're just... Every single guy.
It's every guy.
Has taken a step forward. And that's what coaching is. Did you feel it? Do you feel those improvements across the entire unit? And I think the Chargers are a perfect example and a perfect answer for that. It would probably be Washington's offense for me if we hadn't spent so much time talking about Washington's offense. The one that I'm going to throw out, and it's obviously been diminished because they've had some injuries. I've loved watching what Liam Cohen has done with the Bucs offense. Yeah. Like, I absolutely love watching what they do. Even without Mike Evans and Chris Godwin, the problem solving they've had to do over the last couple of weeks. And
Cade Otton power slot is
just building the passing game out of Cade Otton and the way that they're using the running backs. Like, with you had 2 guys come off that tree that took head coaching or assistant coaching jobs, literally off the old Rams staffs that took OC jobs in the NFC South. Between him and Zach Robinson, I think a lot more people probably could have predicted that Zach Robinson was going to do a good job. He was immediately coming off that Rams staff. He was Raheem Morris's hand-picked guy to bring with him from that staff to run the offense. The fact that the Falcons are this sort of team, it's like, okay, I could probably expect that. Liam Cohen bounced around a little bit. He was at Kentucky. The Bucs were picking a guy kind of out of the air in a way that the Falcons weren't because they were starting a staff from day one. I had more questions about what the Bucs would look like. And outside of maybe Washington, in terms of teams that I am thrilled to turn on now that I didn't necessarily think I was going to feel that way on August 15th, the Bucs are right there at the top of that list.
Yeah, their screen game, by the way.
The screen game is incredible. It's so good.
It is insanely good. Like, even just that one where it's like, it looks like an angle route kind of screen that they throw to Rachaad White this past week. I mean, just every week they've got something like that.
Yeah. One of the single biggest improvements year to year, we talked about Chargers defense. That is certainly up there. Bucs running game.
Yeah.
So much better this year. And some of that is the offensive line's playing better. Sadly, Tristan Wirfs is going to be missing time now, which is going to make that harder. But
it's only a couple of weeks. That's good because it looked like it could have been worse than that.
Exactly.
Let's get to the flip side of this. Biggest disappointment for you, Barnwell, through 10 weeks has been what?
I threw a few guys out there. I'm sure players that have come up on this show regularly. Anthony Richardson feels like a really obvious one, unfortunately.
Colts offense was one of my
Colts offense,
candidates.
Throw that out there. Kenyon Green and the Texans offensive line. And
Texans offense was also one of my answers.
And then I threw Reek Woolen out there. I was really excited to see Reek Woolen play in the Mike McDonald defense, and he's been really disappointing. So maybe Seahawks defense, which has been very inconsistent. They've now moved on from both of their starting inside linebackers in the middle of the year. Like, that feels very much like a work in progress in a way that, for example, the Chargers defense does not.
Yeah, it's a very good answer. Derrik, who'd you have? This is going to hurt you.
This breaks my heart so bad, but it's Roquan Smith. I think last year, really the last year and a half when he was in Baltimore, he was firmly linebacker 2 behind Fred Warner. Like, there are only 3 or 4 guys who coverage-wise could take away multiple routes on a play, really play what was behind them, squeeze so much air out of the coverage. And then even side to side in the run game, what Roquan Smith could do, killing screens or getting to the perimeter on outside zone plays. Like, he was a truly, truly special player. This year, he's just not that guy. He looks slower. I think he doesn't look like he is as tuned into what the defense is asking of him, and conversely, what offenses are trying to do to attack him. Whereas, last year it felt like eyes in the back of his head. He knew exactly where every dig route was, every seam route. This year, it's just he's conceding so much space in a way that he didn't before. And so I think you could kind of, throw entire Ravens defense into this, right, for disappointing unit.
Yeah.
But I think he is like the embodiment of why it feels so disappointing right now.
I don't think, Barnwell, we talk enough about how there's volatility for corners and coverage players in general, but I don't think we consider or talk enough about how that probably applies to off-ball linebackers as well when you think about them as coverage players.
It's why Fred Warner is so special.
It's such an alien. And by the way, somebody we should have mentioned for Defensive Player of the Year, by the way.
Yeah.
Fred Warner also honorable mention for Defensive Player of the Year. You essentially said like 4 of mine. I had the Texans offense, I had the Colts offense was in there, and the Bears offense. Like just like what the Bears offense and Caleb Williams have looked like. That's my own personal disappointment, but I think it absolutely deserves mention. Last one here, and I think you guys took this maybe slightly different than we probably meant it, but that's totally fine. Was the biggest narrative change. And this was kind of a way to talk about most improved players for me, but I think that there is a bunch of different ways that you could take this. So Barnwell, the position group player team that you think has done the best job at changing their narrative this season is what?
I would say Kyler comes to mind for me.
It's a really good one.
I think there was just this perception of, and like the Call of Duty stuff I'm going to leave aside, but just like this feeling of like, okay, like he is entirely just out of structure. Like he is what just he is. That guy who's going to catch a happen. And that is, like he can't grow. He can't be more efficient. He can't be more consistent. He is significantly more consistent this year. His success rate as a passer, 46.5% before this year, up over 53% this season. Drive after drive, he's making plays. He's smart with the football. He has incredible timing on when to create out of structure. Like he is not defaulting to that, and I think that was a criticism of him in the past, that he would just be only that guy. I don't know how he's not dead after that hit last week, the blindside hit he took last week, but besides that, he has been safe and protected. He's smart running. Just such a fun player to watch each and every week.
Yeah, I love that one because I just am so impressed by what he is down to down, what he's doing within structure, what he's doing within the pocket. He's had that same sort of improvement and maturation that we see from quarterbacks in their 5th, 6th year that sometimes can happen. And I don't think enough people consider what that might look like. And when I say enough people, I mean me. I didn't give him the room for that sort of improvement to happen, and it absolutely has. Derrik, what's yours for this? Biggest narrative changer that you've seen so far this year?
I'm kind of going a little bit bigger picture, and I went with like an entire position groups. Running backs are back, baby. Like think about all of the investment at the position, even just this offseason. The two front runners we just mentioned for Offensive Player of the Year, Derrick Henry, Saquon Barkley, big ticket running backs from bad teams who are now on good teams who are allowed to fully change what their offense is allowed to get away with. Josh Jacobs, to a lesser degree, has actually done that with the Green Bay Packers. I think he's been running hard as hell this season. Obviously, some people got mad at, the Atlanta Falcons for taking Bijan Robinson in the first round, top, 8 or 10 or whatever it was. He is, I think, 4th right now in scrimmage yards behind an offensive line that is like, okay. Like he is doing a superhuman job back there. Think about the Lions, like their investment in signing a guy like David Montgomery, giving him money, and then also spending a 1st-round pick on Jahmyr Gibbs. And then think about
it's such a perfect example because the way that the Lions use their running backs is such proof that running backs are not interchangeable. Think about how different the Lions offense feels when David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs are both in there. It's potent in very different ways, but they feel like completely different units. So this idea that running backs are just these plug and play pieces that actually don't have an impact on who you are and how you feel, I think this season has gone such a long way in debunking that.
And to that point, think about what the Niners have been without Christian McCaffrey. And obviously he played this last week and it still looked a little bit weird, but first game back, whatever. But they were the best offense in football when they had him back there last year. And then for the first 9 weeks of the season, they looked like they didn't know what they wanted to be as an offense because they were like, oh shit, we don't have the Christian McCaffrey bail us out button anymore.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think that's a fantastic
They became a chuck it downfield offense.
Yes.
For half a year. It was like they had like a weird Halloween, like it was like the sexy Niners Halloween costume without McCaffrey. And that's not what they do best. They are a much better offense with McCaffrey in the fold. But yeah, I mean, absolutely. And I think I'll be intrigued to see how teams react to this because there's a subset of teams who I think are going to want to be like, hey, we can spend our running backs now? Great. Like, let's go do it. There may not be the same caliber of players hitting the market. Like, I don't think it's an accident that the Ravens and the Eagles, 2 of the 3 most analytically inclined teams in football, were like, actually, yes, this is a good time to invest heavily.
They bought the dip.
They bought the dip.
They bought the dip, and I think that's the biggest thing, and that's why when those two teams doing it at the same time, I don't think it was an accident on two fronts. One, when you think about it from a distressed asset perspective, and like we've gone way too far in how we're valuing this stuff, those teams are going to jump on that. And two, I think it matters where in the build you are. Is everything else in place? Is this going to be like a finishing touch on your roster that allows you to fill in some of the gaps that exist in your offense? And I think that was true for both the Ravens and the Eagles. Everything else was pretty much in place. Are we going to get a running back that is going to get all the meat on the bone all the time? And I think both of those offenses last year, if you look at missed tackles fourth, rush yards over expected, every single metric that tries to separate running backs from the situation, they were some of the worst teams in the league. Now they've completely flipped that, and now they're some of the best teams in the league, and it's unlocked different versions of their offense. I went completely different with this. I had all narrative changing players the same way that you did with pleasant surprises, Barnwell. I had Zach Bond. I had Greg Rousseau, Mekhi Becton. The way that Mekhi Becton has played for the Eagles, I just completely changed the way we're going to talk about Mekhi Becton. Zach Allen? Like, what the fuck is happening with Zach Allen this year? It's absolutely
Zach Allen was good 2 years ago, though.
Zach Allen
is better this year.
So well this year.
He's better this year. True, for sure.
My number one, though, in terms of how we talk about him, even now, how we talk about him just because of what sort of character he is, but combining that with the player that we're actually seeing, George Pickens has been an oddity, right, over the last couple of years. There have been clips of his effort on certain plays, how he's memed more than almost any other player in the league. George Pickens is objectively good as an NFL player. And we talked about this in the summer, Derrik. Like, I watched him last year, and I was like, there's more to this guy than go balls down the sideline. Like, he has different layers to his game, and I think that we're starting to see that. Among wide receivers with at least 100 snaps this year, he's 6th in yards per route run. Like, this guy is truly affecting games. And you mentioned they have no other pass catchers, and their pass offense is actually competent in large part because of what he is capable of. So I think he has to be mentioned if we're talking about guys who, if we're not talking about them differently yet, we probably should be talking about them a little bit differently by the end of the season.
I think that is a good one. I probably undersold how much hop he's got in his step when he has the ball.
Yeah, I want to see more yak opportunities for him. Like, I legitimately do. They don't give a ton to him, but I do think he probably deserves more of them. All right. That is all we got. Barnwell, thank you very much for the time, sir. I know you were a very busy man and we kept you longer than you probably expected, but you should expect it at this point.
It was great. Very happy to do it. I feel like I need to reconsider my Saquon Barkley, Derrick Henry conversation, though. I feel like
that was the most compelling argument anybody made today. I think is
the
argument that Derrick Henry made about Saquon Barkley. That was a very, very good one. All right, that is all we've got for today. We will be back with our Week 11 preview this Friday. Barnwell, tell the people where they can find your work these days.
ESPN.com, podcast, Bill Barnwell Show, on TV occasionally, all that stuff.
All good stuff. All right, that's all we got, guys. Appreciate you listening. We'll talk to you very soon.